Get out of my seat before I have you dragged off this plane." The words hit the first-class cabin like a slap across the face. Marcus Dunbar looked up slowly from seat 2A. A paper cup of black coffee balanced on his knee, his boarding pass resting flat against his thigh. Nobody in that cabin seemed interested in reading it. The leather seats gleamed. The overhead lights glowed a soft, expensive white. Champagne flutes waited on little folded napkins. It was the quiet kingdom of people who believed the world owed them silence. Standing over him, blocking the aisle with her shoulder, was Eleanor Whitfield. 58 years old, ash-blonde hair cut sharp at the jaw, a cream cashmere wrap thrown over one arm like a flag of surrender that wasn't hers to raise. Diamonds caught the light every time her hand moved, and her hand was moving a lot. "That's my seat," she said again, quieter this time, but somehow crueler for it. Marcus set his coffee down without spilling a drop. He had learned a long time ago that a steady hand told people more than a raised voice ever could. "Ma'am," he said, "this is 2A. It's assigned to me." Eleanor's eyes dragged over him the way you'd study a stain on a white tablecloth. The charcoal hoodie, the dark jeans, the plain canvas sneakers that had walked more factory floors than airport lounges. "To you?" she said, and let out a short laugh, sharp enough to make the man in 3C lower his newspaper. "Sweetheart, first class is up here. Coach is back there, past the curtain, where you probably belong." A few passengers looked away. Not because they hadn't heard her, because they had. Marcus's fingers tightened, just slightly, around the edge of his boarding pass. On the outside, he didn't move. On the inside, something old and familiar pressed against his ribs, the same weight he'd carried through boardrooms and hotel lobbies and country club dining rooms, places where people smiled at him right up until the moment they needed proof he belonged. "I paid for this seat," he said. "You're welcome to check with the crew." "I don't need to check anything," Eleanor snapped. "I fly this route every single month. Everyone on this airline knows I sit in 2A. Behind her, hurrying up the aisle, came a flight attendant named Brianna Cole. 31 years old, blonde ponytail pulled tight, lipstick a shade too red for the lighting, a professional smile stitched onto her face like a uniform. She saw Eleanor standing, she saw Marcus seated, and before she asked a single question, she had already decided who the problem was. "Ma'am, is everything all right?" Brianna asked, resting 2 fingers on Eleanor's forearm, like she was calming a spooked animal. "No, it is not all right," Eleanor said, exhaling like a woman who had just been rescued from a burning building. "This man is sitting in my seat and refusing to move." Brianna turned to Marcus. Her smile stayed exactly where it was. Her eyes did not. They dropped to the hoodie, to the sneakers, to his hands resting quiet on the armrest, and then climbed back up to his face with something colder underneath the customer service warmth. "Sir," she said carefully, "there may be some confusion. Coach boarding continues through the rear of the aircraft." "There's no confusion," Marcus said, and lifted the boarding pass so the seat number faced her. 2A. Brianna barely glanced at it. "Sir, please don't make this difficult." Something flickered behind Marcus's eyes then. Not fear. Not shame. Recognition. The particular, exhausted recognition of a man who has watched this exact scene unfold 100 times in 100 rooms, just with different lighting. In his pocket, his phone buzzed once, then again. A message lit the screen for half a second before he turned it face down against his leg. "Board call in 18 minutes, Mr. Dunbar." No one saw the name on the screen. No one saw the title underneath it. No one in that cabin had the faintest idea that the man they were trying to remove from first class controlled more of this airline than every diamond in Eleanor Whitfield's jewelry box combined. Not yet. Eleanor crossed her arms and smiled, already tasting a victory she hadn't earned. Brianna leaned in, lowering her voice. Not quite enough. "Sir, I'm asking you one last time. Gather your things and move to your correct cabin." Marcus looked from Brianna to Eleanor, then across the rows of watching faces. Some embarrassed, some curious, a few already lifting their phones, the way people do now when they sense a story is about to happen and don't want to miss the beginning. His voice stayed level. I am in my correct seat, and in that moment, the first hairline crack opened in the polished white surface of the cabin. Not loud, not dramatic, but deep enough that everyone in that section would remember exactly where they were sitting when it happened. 3 hours earlier, Marcus Dunbar had been standing in the kitchen of a 2-bedroom rental house in East Charlotte, pouring coffee into a chipped mug that said "World's Okayest Cook," a gift from an assistant who thought his real title was too heavy to put on a coffee mug. On the counter sat a photograph in a cheap frame, curling slightly at one corner. His father, Thomas Dunbar, standing in front of a textile plant in overalls gray, with lint, 31 years of double shifts folded into the lines of his face. His father used to say the same thing every time life tried to put him in his place. Let them show you who they are before you show them what you can do. Marcus had built an entire airline on that sentence without ever telling anyone that's what he was doing. He flew coach for the first 6 years of Meridian Sky Airways' existence, not for publicity, but because he wanted to know exactly what his passengers felt when the tray table didn't fold right or the flight was delayed without explanation. Somewhere around year 7, after the company had grown into one of the fastest expanding regional carriers on the East Coast, his board insisted he at least sit in the cabin his own executive fare had paid for. He'd agreed. He still wore the hoodie, old habits, and a healthy suspicion of rooms that only respected him once they knew who he was. Die hard. He never told the crew who he was on a normal flight. He wanted to see the airline the way a stranger saw it. Today, that decision was about to cost him more than he expected and reveal more than he ever wanted to. Eleanor Whitfield had boarded 14 minutes earlier through the priority lane, trailing a rolling bag with a designer logo stamped across it in gold. She had not looked at a single gate agent's face the entire walk down the jet bridge. She didn't look at faces that couldn't do anything for her. She looked at name tags, at uniforms, at anything that told her where power sat in a room, so she could stand close enough to borrow it. She had, in fact, sat in 2A on this exact flight for 11 months running, ever since her divorce settlement freed up enough money to make first class a habit instead of an occasion. The seat had become, in her mind, something closer to property than a purchase. She had once made a gate agent cry over a seat change. She considered it one of her better Tuesdays. So when she rolled her suitcase up the aisle and found a stranger in gray already sitting where her identity apparently lived, something in her chest didn't just protest. It combusted. "Get up," she'd said, the words that opened this whole story. "That's my seat." Now, with Brianna hovering and Marcus still seated, a young woman 2 rows back lifted her phone. Her name was Priya Anand, 22. A college hoodie of her own, pulled over her headphones, eyes wide, with the particular alertness of someone who has learned the hard way that adults don't always tell the truth once a camera is off. Her grandmother had raised her to never interrupt her elders. Her mother had raised her to record the truth before it got buried. She tapped the screen. Live. 12 viewers joined, then 30, then close to 100 before the plane had even pushed back from the gate. "They're not even going to check his ticket," Priya whispered, barely moving her lips. Brianna noticed the phone. "Ma'am, please put that away." "I'm just recording," Priya said, voice trembling, but steady enough to hold. "This is a private aircraft environment," Brianna said sharply. "No, it isn't," said a man in 3D, closing the paperback he hadn't actually been reading. His name was Walter Simmons, 66, a retired federal magistrate with reading glasses pushed up into silver hair. "It's a commercial flight, and that man showed you a valid boarding pass." Brianna's cheeks warmed. "Sir, we have this handled." "Doesn't look handled to me," Walter said quietly. Eleanor rounded on him. Why don't you mind your own business? He held her gaze for exactly 1 second, then looked back toward Marcus. What does his ticket actually say? Brianna's jaw tightened. It appears there may be a discrepancy, she said, though she still hadn't fully looked at the pass in Marcus's hand. There is no discrepancy, Marcus said, and this time held it out, so she had no choice but to take it. She scanned it. Marcus Dunbar, seat 2A, first class, full fare. The truth sat right there in black ink against white paper, and for a fraction of a second something shifted behind her eyes. The flicker of a person realizing they were wrong and deciding, in that same breath, that admitting it out loud would cost more than staying wrong. She didn't apologize. Instead, she turned toward the forward galley and called out, voice tighter now, "Derek, I need you up here." From behind the curtain came Derek Holloway, the lead purser, tall, silver at the temples, the calm, settled expression of a man who mistook authority for truth, because no one had ever made him separate the two. He walked the aisle slowly, and the temperature in first class seemed to drop half a degree with every step. He didn't ask the obvious question. He asked the one that protected the version of events he'd already decided on. "Sir, why are you refusing crew instructions?" The words landed on the cabin like a verdict. Priya's live stream jumped from 100 viewers to several hundred in the time it took Marcus to answer. "I'm not refusing instructions," Marcus said. "I'm refusing to give up a seat I paid for." Derek reached for the boarding pass, glanced at it for exactly as long as it took to decide it was inconvenient, and handed it back without comment. "Mr. Dunbar," he said, "we have a long-time premium customer with a preference for this seat." "A preference isn't an assignment," Marcus said. Eleanor scoffed. "This is exactly the attitude I was talking about." Derek turned to her with the practiced warmth of a man selling comfort instead of honesty. "Ms. Whitfield, I apologize for the delay. We're going to get this handled." Handled. The word pressed against Marcus's ribs like a bruise, finding an old bruise. It was the language every system used when it wanted cruelty to sound like procedure. If his boarding pass says 2A, Walter Simmons said from 3D, "Why is there anything left to discuss?" "Sir, please allow the crew to manage the cabin," Derek said. "I'm asking a reasonable question." "And I'm giving you a reasonable answer," Derek said, though nothing about his tone was reasonable anymore. "This is a matter of operational discretion." "Sounds more like a matter of embarrassment," Walter said, and a ripple moved through the rows around them. Quiet breaths, shifting shoulders, the first small crack of public doubt working its way through leather seats and folded newspapers. Eleanor felt the shift too, and panic sharpened her anger into something uglier. "I have flown this airline for 15 years, she said, voice rising. "I will not be bullied out of my own seat by a man trying to make a scene." "You took my seat," Marcus said quietly. "I was assigned this seat." "No," he said. "You expected it." The sentence landed clean and hard, and nobody answered it because there was nothing left to say that wouldn't make things worse for whoever said it. Derek stepped closer, angling his body to block Marcus from some of the phones now rising around the cabin. "Mr. Dunbar, I need you to lower your tone." "He hasn't even raised his voice," Priya whispered into her stream, stunned. Across the aisle, an older woman named Dorothy Vance, 73, a cardigan buttoned to the throat despite the cabin heat, had been silent since boarding. Silence had always come easier to her than confrontation. But something about the calm in Marcus's face was beginning to shame the calm right out of her own hesitation. "He's been polite," she said, clearing her throat. "Ma'am, please remain seated," Derek said. "I am seated," Dorothy said. "Then please remain out of this." Her hands trembled slightly in her lap, not with fear this time, but with the effort of finding courage this late in a life that had mostly avoided needing it. "You people always say that," she added, "when you don't want witnesses." The cabin went very still. "Before you call security," Marcus said, "before you get to that point, I would strongly suggest you make absolutely certain you understand exactly who you're removing from this aircraft. Derek's mouth tightened. Is that a threat? No, Marcus said. It's a warning, and for the first time, something cold moved through Derek Holloway that had nothing to do with the cabin air conditioning. He didn't listen to it. Claire, he said. No. He called toward the galley for backup, and a second flight attendant, Jenna Marsh, 26, and a gate supervisor named Renee Castillo, 43, navy blazer, tablet clutched against her chest, arrived within the minute. Renee's mind, trained under exactly this kind of pressure, did what trained minds do when they're afraid of being wrong in public. It searched for the fastest available story, and Derek handed it to her before she could look for her own. We have a passenger refusing crew instructions, he said. He's occupying a premium seat requested by another customer and won't relocate. That is not what happened, Marcus said. Eleanor threw both hands up. Oh, for heaven's sake, he's been arguing since the moment I boarded. A murmur moved through the cabin, but this time it wasn't agreement, it was unease. They're lying now, Priya whispered into her stream, her voice cracking. They're actually lying. Renee tapped her tablet a little too quickly, as if speed could substitute for certainty. We're reviewing the manifest. You might want to review it before you remove a paying passenger, Walter said. Sir, please remain seated. I am seated, he said. And I'm also a retired federal magistrate. That landed harder than anything said so far. Renee's fingers stilled over the screen. 2 security officers arrived at the forward door minutes later. Officer Reuben Castle, 51, broad-shouldered and tired around the eyes, and Officer Danielle Ford, 34, sharper, the kind of officer who scanned a room before she scanned a suspect. Behind them came the airport duty manager, and the whole cabin seemed to inhale and hold its breath at once. Sir, I'm going to need you to stand up and come with us, Officer Castle said. On what grounds? Marcus asked. Crew requested removal. Did you verify the seat assignment? Castle paused. It was a small pause, but it mattered, and his eyes flicked toward Renee, who was still tapping her tablet like the answer might appear if she just refreshed it fast enough. We're still reviewing the manifest, Renee said again. You might want to finish that review before removing him, Walter repeated, and Officer Ford's eyes sharpened on him in a new way. A retired federal magistrate meant a witness with vocabulary. A witness with vocabulary meant a report that could survive a courtroom. Brianna stood near the galley, pale now, the boarding pass still burning a hole in her memory. She had seen it. She had known. Tell them what happened, Derek said to her, low and urgent. For one terrifying second, she almost told the truth. That Marcus had been calm from the first word. That Eleanor had claimed a seat that was never legally hers. That the boarding pass had said 2A the entire time, and Brianna had looked at his hoodie before she'd bothered to look at his name. Instead, she looked at Eleanor's furious face, at Derek's rigid authority, and thought of her mortgage, her job, her reputation, the fear that sat underneath all of it like a stone. He refused to cooperate, she said softly. Marcus lowered his eyes for half a second, not in defeat, in disappointment. Officer Ford heard the softness in Brianna's voice and studied her face the way you study a witness who already knows they're lying. Refused what exactly? Ford asked. Brianna blinked. What? What exactly did he refuse to do? He refused a lawful crew instruction, Derek cut in. I asked her, Ford said, without looking away from Brianna. The cabin tightened around the silence that followed. He refused to move, Brianna finally said. From the seat on his boarding pass? Ford asked. No one answered. The silence grew teeth. This is absurd, Eleanor snapped. Why are we interrogating the crew? He is the problem. Marcus turned his phone face up for the first time. The screen lit in his palm. Board vote paused pending your update. Renee saw it. So did Officer Ford. So did Brianna. Mr. Dunbar, Renee said carefully, her tone shifting by exactly 1 degree. What company are you with? Derek shot her a warning look. Renee. Ethan, Marcus, didn't answer right away. He looked around the cabin, at the phones, at the bowed heads, at Eleanor still standing beside the seat she had tried to claim by pure force of entitlement, at Brianna, who could no longer meet his eyes. Then he looked at Officer Castle. "I'll show you identification," he said. "But before I do, I want every person in this cabin to understand something." His voice stayed quiet. It carried anyway. "You weren't called because I was dangerous. You were called because I wouldn't disappear." No one moved. Even Eleanor stopped breathing for a second. He reached into his jacket slowly. Officer Castle tensed out of pure habit, then lowered his hand when Marcus produced a plain black wallet. Government ID, a platinum airline credential, and beneath both, a matte corporate badge stamped with the same navy and gold crest painted on the tail fin of the very aircraft they were sitting inside. Renee Castillo's face drained of color. Her tablet nearly slipped from her hand. Brianna whispered one word, "No." The credential read, in plain block letters beneath the crest, Marcus T. Dunbar, founder and chief executive officer, Meridian Sky Airways. For a moment, the entire cabin seemed to lose its oxygen. The lights kept glowing. The engines kept humming somewhere beneath the floor. A champagne glass ticked faintly against a tray. But every single person in that section stopped moving, stopped whispering, stopped pretending they didn't understand exactly what they were looking at. "That can't be right," Derek said, his voice cracking around the words. "It is," Marcus said. Eleanor let out a laugh, too loud, too brittle to be real. "Oh, come on. This is some kind of stunt." No one joined her laughter. Not one person. Marcus unlocked his phone and turned the screen so Renee could see it clearly. Not the customer app, not a loyalty account, but the internal executive dashboard reserved for a small handful of people at the top of the company. Flight operations, legal escalation, board communications, live social monitoring, crew personnel files. His name sat at the very top of the screen. "Executive control access. Please confirm for the officers," he said. Renee's voice came out barely above a whisper. "This is Mr. Dunbar. He is the founder and CEO of Meridian Sky Airways." The words didn't explode through the cabin. They froze it. They froze in Eleanor's wide, disbelieving eyes. They froze in Brianna's trembling mouth. They froze in Derek's clenched jaw, in the dozens of phones still recording, capturing the exact second that arrogance finally met its own reflection. "He owns the airline," Priya whispered into her live stream, and the comment counter exploded upward, so fast the numbers blurred. Marcus stood slowly without theater, the way a man rises when he has been patient long enough to gather every witness he needs. Eleanor stepped backward without realizing she was doing it. He looked at her first. "You put your hand on the back of my seat. You claimed something that was never yours. You insulted me in front of 40 strangers because you assumed your comfort mattered more than my dignity." "I didn't know who you were," Eleanor said, her voice cracking. "That isn't a defense," Marcus said. "That's the confession." Her face crumpled around the sentence in a way no amount of cashmere or diamonds could soften. He turned to Brianna next. "You saw my boarding pass." "Yes," she whispered, eyes filling. "And you still called security. I thought there was confusion." "No," he said. "You created the confusion. Because the truth would have required you to treat me fairly from the very first second. And that was never on the table for you." Derek tried to step in, desperate to reclaim some shape of authority. "Mr. Dunbar, clearly this got out of hand. We were only trying to protect the cabin." "The cabin was never in danger," Marcus said. "Only my dignity was, and only because every one of you decided that was an acceptable price for comfort." He turned to the row of watching passengers. "This was never about a seat," he said. "It was about who gets believed on sight, and who gets doubted on sight, and who gets protected, and who gets removed." Outside the small oval window, the afternoon sun flashed hard across the wing, and inside the cabin a very different kind of light had switched on, one with nowhere left to hide. Eleanor tried to recover some version of composure. "Mr. Dunbar, I think there's been a terrible misunderstanding." "No, Miss Whitfield," he said. "A misunderstanding is when two people miss the truth by accident. This was not an accident. You looked at me and decided the truth didn't apply to me. That isn't a misunderstanding. That's a choice." Her mouth opened, closed. The diamonds on her wrist still caught the light, but they no longer looked like elegance. They looked like decoration on a disguise that had just collapsed in front of several 100,000 strangers online. Officer Ford stepped forward, her voice steady. "Miss Whitfield, given the passenger's valid documentation and the crew's own admission that the boarding pass was seen and disregarded, I'm going to need you to gather your belongings." Eleanor's head snapped up. "Remove me? I didn't assault anyone. I asked for a seat I always use." "No," Officer Ford said. "You claimed a seat that was never assigned to you, and when the crew failed to correct you, you let their failure become your weapon." "You're taking his side," Eleanor said. "We're taking the facts," Ford answered. Eleanor looked toward Brianna for rescue. Brianna looked away. She looked toward Derek. Derek stared at the floor. She looked toward the rows of passengers who had, only minutes earlier, silently agreed with her without saying a word, and found nothing there now but the particular silence of people who no longer wanted to be associated with what they'd almost defended. With stiff, furious movements, Eleanor gathered her designer bag, the clasp snapping shut like a small, sharp gunshot. As she stepped into the aisle, Priya's phone followed her the entire way. Eleanor lowered her face, but there was nowhere left on that aircraft, or on the internet, to hide from what she had helped build. Marcus did not sit back down yet. He turned to Brianna. "Miss Cole, please surrender your crew tablet to Ms. Castillo." "My tablet." "Company. Property involved in an active investigation." Her hands shook as she unclipped it from the strap and passed it over, and the small gesture felt to her like handing over the last piece of the person she'd been pretending to be for the last 20 minutes. He turned to Derek. "Mr. Holloway, you're relieved of passenger-facing duties, effective immediately, pending a full review." "On this flight?" Derek asked. "Immediately," Marcus said. Jenna Marsh, who had said very little the whole time, stepped back from service without argument the moment Marcus's eyes reached her. Perhaps because she was wiser than the others. Perhaps because shame had simply caught up with her faster. Renee's tablet buzzed again. "Sir," she said, "corporate communications is asking for direction. News outlets are already contacting the media line." Marcus exhaled slowly. He looked tired now. Not weak, but tired in the particular way strong people get tired when the world keeps forcing them to prove their humanity before it will let them do anything else. "Tell them," he said, "that Meridian Sky Airways is aware of a serious discrimination incident aboard one of its own aircraft involving its founder and chief executive. Tell them a full investigation has begun. Tell them the employees involved have been removed from duty pending review. And tell them this company will not hide behind the words isolated incident." Renee typed fast. Walter Simmons nodded faintly. Priya lowered her phone for the first time since the confrontation began, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. Officer Ford looked at Marcus. "Mr. Dunbar, do you still intend to fly on this aircraft?" Marcus turned toward the window. "Yes," he said. "But not until every passenger on this plane understands one thing." He faced the cabin fully. "I was not protected today because the system worked. I was protected because I happen to have power. And that should disturb every decent person sitting in this cabin right now." No one breathed for a moment. The words settled into the leather seats, into the carpet, into the hands of every passenger still holding a phone, into the quiet guilt of people who had watched too much and said too little. Dorothy Vance was the first to move. She unbuckled her seatbelt and stood, one hand gripping the armrest for balance. "Mr. Dunbar," she said, "I should have spoken sooner. I knew it was wrong the moment it started, and I waited until it felt safe to say so. That isn't courage. That's comfort wearing courage's coat. No one mocked her for it. No one told her to sit down. Walter Simmons stood next. "I'm sorry too," he said. "I challenged them, but not soon enough. A man shouldn't need a retired judge in the cabin to have his own ticket respected." Priya wiped her cheek with her sleeve, phone still in her other hand. "My grandmother always told me that silence picks a side," she said. "I didn't understand what she meant until today." Marcus looked at her for a long moment. "You made sure this story couldn't be rewritten afterward," he said. "That matters more than you know." Renee Castillo stepped toward the front of the cabin, her voice still fragile but audible. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be replacing the affected crew before departure. This flight will be delayed, while Meridian Sky completes an immediate review. Anyone who wishes to deplane is welcome to do so. Anyone who stays will be looked after properly." Nobody complained about the delay. That silence said more than any apology could have. At the forward door, Eleanor paused beside Officer Castle, mascara faintly smudged, anger still fighting embarrassment across her face. "This is going to ruin my reputation," she said. "No, Miss Whitfield," Marcus said without cruelty. "Your actions did that. The cameras only refused to lie for you." Officer Castle guided her out through the jet bridge. Her heels clicked away, sharp and small, until the sound disappeared completely. Brianna stood near the galley, stripped of her tablet and her certainty both. "Mr. Dunbar," she said, voice breaking, "I don't expect forgiveness." "Good," Marcus said. "Forgiveness isn't a customer service recovery tool. It isn't owed just because consequences finally showed up." She lowered her head. "But you can put the whole truth in your statement, without protecting yourself," he added. "I will," she said. Derek said nothing at all. For years, he had believed professionalism meant control. Now he understood, standing in the wreckage of his own certainty, that control without fairness was only cruelty with better posture. Marcus finally sat back down in 2A. The seat felt different now. Not like comfort, not like victory, more like evidence that had to be carried the rest of the way home. Renee approached carefully. "Sir, replacement crew is on the way. The board is asking whether you'd like to continue the emergency call after takeoff." He looked out the window at the ground crew, moving beneath the wing, in bright vests, small figures guiding machines far larger than the house he'd grown up in. "Yes," he said, "but first, draft a company-wide directive." Renee opened a document. Effective immediately, he began, "No passenger will be removed from a paid seat without documented verification by 2 independent employees. Any escalation involving suspected fraud must be reviewed against objective evidence, not appearance, not race, not the pressure applied by another passenger. Every customer-facing employee will complete real accountability training, not as a public relations exercise, but as a condition of continued employment. And every crew member involved in today's incident, along with their direct supervisors, will undergo a full review with possible termination. And any severance affected will forfeit standard exit benefits under the airline's misconduct clause." He paused. "And add this," he said. "When dignity is treated as optional, safety has already failed." Renee stopped typing for half a second, then finished the sentence. The replacement crew arrived 20 minutes later, quiet, without speeches, without any attempt to smooth over what had already happened in front of several 100,000 strangers online. The new lead flight attendant, a woman named Carol Ibsen, stopped beside seat 2A and looked directly at Marcus. "Mr. Dunbar," she said, "on behalf of every employee at this airline who still believes we can be better than what happened here today, welcome aboard." The cabin stayed quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet now. Not tension. Recognition. 6 weeks later, Meridian Sky Airways released the results of its internal review. Derek Holloway was terminated for cause, After, the investigation uncovered 2 prior complaints from passengers of color that had been quietly dismissed under his supervision, each one buried in a folder labeled resolved without any documentation to support the word. Brianna Cole was placed on a mandatory 18-month probation with retraining, kept her job only because she agreed, without being asked twice, to speak publicly and honestly about the choice she'd made in that aisle. Renee Castillo was reassigned to a new station, not punished exactly, but never again allowed to work a gate without a second-level sign-off on any removal decision. Eleanor Whitfield was permanently banned from Meridian Sky Airways. The footage from Priya Anand's livestream had been picked up by 4 national outlets within 72 hours, and the woman who had once made a gate agent cry over a seat number found her name attached, for the rest of that year, to a phrase she never chose for herself: the Diamond Entitlement Flight. Her country club quietly declined to renew her membership. Her own daughter, watching the footage twice, called her afterward and asked a single question. Eleanor never fully answered in public. "Mom, would you have done that if he'd been white?" 3 months after the flight, Marcus received a handwritten letter, forwarded through the company's public relations office. It was from Eleanor. 4 sentences, no excuses folded inside them this time. "I was wrong. I saw a stranger and decided who he was before I let him tell me. I have spent every day since trying to understand why that felt so easy. I am sorry it took losing everything for me to ask the question at all." Marcus read it twice, then placed it in the same drawer where he kept his father's old work badge from the textile plant. The one with the photograph faded almost to gray. He didn't write back right away. Some apologies need to sit somewhere quiet before they mean anything. On a flight to Denver a few months later, wearing the same gray hoodie, sitting in an ordinary window seat and coach because the mood had struck him to remember where the company started, Marcus watched a young gate agent gently correct an elderly man who'd wandered into the wrong boarding line, patient, unhurried, treating a stranger's mistake like something worth a little kindness instead of a little shame. Nobody in that jet bridge knew who was watching. Marcus didn't tell them. He just sat back, closed his eyes, and let the plane climb into the evening sky, carrying, somewhere far beneath the clouds, the quiet proof that a system could actually learn, if enough ordinary people finally decided to stop looking away.